It started as a dinner like any other. A warm evening, the table set, wine glasses gleaming under the dim kitchen lights, and forced smiles stretched across faces pretending everything was just fine. But by the end of that night, the masks would crack. And my in-laws, they would never look at my son the same way again. You see, this isn't just another family drama. This is the story of a boy they mocked, a boy they dismissed, until I handed them a letter that shattered every smug assumption they'd ever held. Let me take you back to the beginning. It was a Thursday night, the kind of evening where you can feel tension simmering in the air before anyone even speaks. My husband, Daniel, and I were hosting his parents and younger sister for dinner. A rare event, thankfully. Ever since our son, Caleb, was born, their visits had become both infrequent and painfully uncomfortable. There was always an undertone of judgment in their comments, their glances, especially toward Caleb. Caleb is 6 years old. He's quiet, introspective. He doesn't warm up to strangers easily, not even family. And he's different, beautifully different. He doesn't talk much, not the way other 6-year-olds do, and when he does, his words are careful, almost poetic. He likes to line his toys in perfect rows and trace the shadows on the wall with his fingers. He loves the sound of wind chimes and can spend hours watching them sway. But my in-laws didn't see beauty. They saw strangeness. And that night, they didn't hold back. "Still not talking like other kids, huh?" Daniel's father said, stabbing a slice of roast chicken with unnecessary force. "What are you two doing? Raising a mime?" His wife giggled, not kindly. "Maybe he's just shy, dear. Or maybe he's not all there." She said it with a sip of her wine, as though casual cruelty could be washed down like a bad vintage. My heart pounded, but I said nothing. I was used to this. They never accepted that Caleb was on the autism spectrum. In fact, they avoided the word like it was some sort of accusation. To them, it was a flaw, a label, problem. Daniel shot me a helpless look, but as usual, he didn't correct them. His silence hurt more than their laughter. "Look," his sister chimed in. "He's playing with his spoon. Isn't he a little too old for that?" Her tone was syrupy, fake. "Or is that some new therapy trick?" Caleb sat at the far end of the table, oblivious to their mockery, or maybe just choosing not to acknowledge it. He was gently tapping his spoon against the side of his glass, watching the vibrations ripple through the water. There was a dreamy focus in his eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and demand they stop reducing my son to a punchline. Instead, I stood up, walked calmly to the hallway drawer, pulled out the letter I had printed weeks ago. I had written it late one night after another failed family gathering, fueled by tears and the fierce need to defend my child. I never intended to give it to them, but something shifted in me that night. I walked back to the table, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. "I think it's time you read this," I said. My voice was low, calm, too calm, the kind of calm that hides fire underneath. They looked at me like I was being dramatic. Daniel looked confused, but I didn't explain. I simply laid the letter on the table and slid it toward them. "What's this?" his mother asked, already reaching for it with a sigh. "Something you need to read. Something I should have said a long time ago." And just like that, the air changed. The room fell silent, except for the soft clink of Caleb's spoon against glass. Daniel's father cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. His wife leaned in. Their daughter crossed her arms, amused, as though expecting a rant. But what they got was something else entirely. The letter wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet storm, written with trembling hands and sleepless honesty. It began like this: "To the people who claim to love my son but refuse to understand him." It went on to describe who Caleb really was, his passions, his fears, the way his face lit up when he heard piano music, how he could recall the exact sound of rain on the roof from a year ago, and how he cried when a bird flew into our window because he felt its pain like it was his own. It spoke of his diagnosis, not as a curse but as a different lens through which he saw the world, one filled with patterns, textures, and unspoken beauty. I explained the sensory challenges, the social difficulties, the moments of silence that were not emptiness but depth. I reminded them of the night he pointed at the sky and said, "The moon looks tired today," and how that single sentence said more about his soul than anything they could mock. I also wrote about the damage, how their jokes weren't harmless, how their ignorance taught Caleb that being different was wrong, that silence made him invisible, and how every laugh chipped away at the trust a little boy should feel when surrounded by family. As they read, the mood shifted. I watched it happen in real time. Daniel's mother's lips parted, then closed again. His father leaned back in his chair, suddenly very quiet. Even his sister lowered her arms, her expression hard to read. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched them absorb it, word by word, the way you watch a storm roll in from the horizon, inevitable, righteous. When they finished, no one spoke for a full minute. Finally, Daniel's mother looked up, her face pale. "I didn't know," she began. "No," I said quietly. "You didn't want to know." Caleb had stopped tapping his spoon. He was watching me now, his big, solemn eyes meeting mine with a calm trust that tore at my heart. And then he did something none of them expected. He stood up, walked over to my side, and gently took my hand. "He's listening," I said. "He always is. You just never cared enough to hear him." Daniel finally spoke. His voice cracked when he said it. "I should have said something sooner." I looked at him, but I didn't reply. That conversation would come later. What mattered now was that the letter had been read. The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was heavy, charged with truth, maybe even guilt. And I let it linger, because they needed to sit with it, with everything they had ignored, denied, and dismissed. The dinner ended quietly. No more jokes, no more smug glances, just quiet plates and the echo of a truth too big to ignore. And as they left, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not understanding, not yet, but something close. Fear. Not of Caleb, but of themselves. The house was eerily quiet after they left. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful but heavy, like the walls are holding their breath. Caleb had gone to bed, curled up with his favorite blanket, and Daniel stood at the kitchen sink, staring blankly into the darkness beyond the window. I wiped down the already clean counter for the third time, waiting for him to say something. Anything. But the silence dragged on. Finally, I spoke. "You should have said something. A long time ago." Daniel didn't turn around. His voice was low, like he was afraid to wake something sleeping. "I know. I didn't want to make it worse." "You didn't make it better either." That stung him. I saw it in the way his shoulders tensed. But I didn't take it back. Because it was true. He turned slowly and looked at me. There was pain in his eyes, yes, but also something else. Shame. "They're my parents," he said quietly. "And for so long, I thought if I just stayed quiet, they'd come around. That they'd see Caleb and, I don't know, understand eventually." "And how long were we supposed to wait for eventually?" I asked. "Until Caleb's a teenager who thinks he's broken, because the people who were supposed to love him made him feel like a mistake?" Daniel closed his eyes, and for a moment I thought he might cry. But when he opened them again, his voice had a steely edge I hadn't heard before. "They won't be back here. Not until they apologize. To you. To him." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. The next morning, everything felt different. Not outwardly. Caleb still asked for his usual breakfast of buttered toast, still arranged his dinosaur toys by size on the living room rug. But there was a subtle shift. In me. In Daniel. Even in the air between us. Felt like we'd crossed an invisible line. One that couldn't be uncrossed. Around noon, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and sighed. "Mom," he said, holding it out. "She wants to come over." I raised an eyebrow. "Alone?" He nodded. "She said she wants to talk. Just her." For a moment I considered saying no. But part of me was curious, was she coming to apologize or to defend herself? "Fine," I said. "But only if Caleb's not around. I won't let her near him until I know what this is about." She arrived less than an hour later. No makeup, no dramatic jewelry, just plain clothes and an expression I didn't recognize. something halfway between regret and desperation. I offered her coffee. She declined. We sat in the living room, across from each other, like two opponents in a quiet war. Daniel stood nearby, his arms folded. "I read the letter again this morning," she began. "Twice." I said nothing. "I didn't realize." Her voice cracked. And for once, it didn't sound performative. "I didn't realize how much I've hurt you." "Hurt him? You didn't want to," I replied. "You wanted to believe you knew better." She looked down at her hands. "I thought I was being honest, that I was helping. I was raised to believe you don't coddle kids, you push them to toughen up. I thought if I laughed, it would make things lighter." "It didn't," I said. "It made him feel like a joke, and it made us feel alone." There was a pause, a long one. Then she did something I didn't expect. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," she said. "I didn't know how else to say it." She handed it to me. I hesitated, then unfolded it. It wasn't a long letter, but it was raw. She admitted her fears. How she didn't know how to relate to Caleb. How his quietness made her uncomfortable because it forced her to sit with her own silence. How she'd felt helpless not being able to fix him. So instead, she tried to laugh it off. How cruel that laughter had become. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. I looked up at her, and for the first time in years, I saw not the overbearing mother-in-law, but a woman trying to make sense of the pain she caused. "Thank you," I said, "for this." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to learn. If you'll let me." I nodded slowly. "That's not my decision to make." She tilted her head. "Then whose is it?" "Caleb's," I said. "And it might take time." Over the next few weeks, something shifted. She didn't try to rush her way back in. Instead, she sent letters. One to Caleb each week. Simple, kind letters. Describing the flowers in her garden, stories about Daniel when he was a boy, pictures of birds she thought Caleb would like. At first, Caleb didn't react. He'd glance at the envelope, then go back to his puzzles. But slowly, week by week, he began to open them. He'd run his fingers over the paper, trace the drawings. And one day, without a word, he put a letter on the fridge. A small act, but huge for him. Daniel's father, however, was a different story. He didn't call, didn't write. And when Daniel reached out, he dismissed it as drama. Said I was being too sensitive. That Caleb would grow out of it. And that's when something inside Daniel finally broke. "I'm done," he told me one night, his voice quiet but resolved. "I'm not letting my father be a presence in Caleb's life if he refuses to even try." I believed him, and part of me grieved for him because I knew what it meant to let go of a parent. But the truth was we were building something stronger without them. A space where Caleb could be wholly himself. A family that didn't just tolerate his differences but celebrated them. Then, something unexpected happened. One rainy Saturday, Daniel's sister showed up unannounced. She stood on the porch, soaked, mascara running, holding a stack of papers. "I read the letter," she said, "and I read something else." She handed me the stack. It was printouts, articles, books, essays on autism, sensory processing, neurodiversity. "I started reading," she said, her voice cracking, "and I realized how ignorant I've been. I'm so sorry. For everything." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want to be that person anymore." I believed her, and so did Caleb, surprisingly. He let her sit beside him that evening while he sorted his toy animals. He didn't speak, but he didn't move away. She watched quietly, matching his pace. And when he picked up a toy elephant and handed it to her without a word, her breath caught. "Is this okay?" she whispered. He nodded. That was all she needed. We weren't a perfect family. We never would be. But things had changed. The letter had become more than a confrontation. It became a mirror. One that forced them to see not just Caleb, but themselves. Some looked and walked away. Others looked and chose to change. It was a Tuesday morning when Daniel finally made the call. He had been quiet all weekend, distant even, moving through the house like a man carrying something too heavy to name. Caleb noticed. He didn't say anything, but he started staying closer to Daniel, following him from room to room like a shadow. That was Caleb's way. He felt things deeply, even when they weren't said aloud. I found Daniel in the garage, sitting in the car with the door open, phone in his hand, thumb hovering over the call button. "I have to do this," he said. I didn't try to stop him. I just nodded. He hit the button and lifted the phone to his ear. 3 rings. "Hello." His father's voice was sharp, clipped, like always. "It's me," Daniel said. "We need to talk. Face to face." A pause. "I don't think that's necessary," his father replied. "If this is about your wife's little stunt." "It's not a stunt," Daniel said firmly. "It's a wake-up call, and you can either ignore it or show up." Another long pause. Then, begrudgingly, "Fine. My place. Tomorrow night." The following evening, I stayed home with Caleb while Daniel went alone. I didn't ask him to. I wanted to be there to stand beside him. But he said this had to be his voice, his words, and I understood. He left just after sunset, the sky bruised with clouds. Caleb stood at the window and watched the car disappear. I sat with him on the couch, his hand in mine. No words, just the rhythmic sound of the wind brushing against the windows. We stayed that way for a long time. Meanwhile, Daniel pulled up to his childhood home. A tall, cold structure of brick and shadow. The kind of place that felt more like a museum than a memory. Inside, it smelled the same. Polished wood, leather, a faint trace of cigar smoke embedded into the very bones of the house. His father was in the study, as always, sitting in the old leather chair, sipping whiskey like it was a prop in a play he'd performed 1,000 times. "You came?" the older man said, raising a brow but not rising. Daniel didn't answer. He simply walked in and sat across from him. Silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Then Daniel broke it. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I'm here because you've refused to listen. And I need to say this, whether you hear it or not." His father swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "All right, I'm listening." "Caleb isn't broken," Daniel said. "He's different. And your mockery, your complete lack of empathy, is unacceptable." "I never mocked him," his father said too quickly. Daniel's voice stayed calm. "You laughed. You called him weird. You dismissed everything we said about his diagnosis. That's not just ignorance, Dad. That's cruelty." His father's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Daniel leaned forward, his voice lowering. "You always do this. You belittle things you don't understand." "I raised you just fine," his father snapped. "You turned out all right, didn't you?" "No," Daniel said. "I turned out quiet, afraid to speak, afraid to disappoint you. That's not all right, Dad. That's trauma." His father looked genuinely startled. A crack in the armor. Daniel pressed on. "You act like strength is silence, like emotion is weakness. But Caleb isn't broken. He just doesn't fit into the tiny box you think boys are supposed to live in. And the only reason I didn't stand up to you sooner is because I was still trying to earn something I should have never had to beg for, your approval." The old man's face was tight, unreadable. He sipped his drink again, slower this time. Then he said something unexpected. "You remind me of him." Daniel frowned. "Who?" "My brother," his father muttered, eyes unfocused. "Liam." Daniel blinked. "I didn't know you had a brother." A long silence followed. "He died when I was 12, his father said. "He was different too, always in his head, always wandering off, saying strange things, lining up his toy soldiers instead of playing with them." Daniel leaned back, stunned. "No one ever said the word autism back then," his father continued. "They just called him slow, said he'd grow out of it. But he didn't. He got worse. Or maybe the world just got harder." "What happened to him?" Daniel asked, voice soft. His father didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the mantel, picked up a small framed photo. One Daniel had never really noticed. "He drowned," he said finally, "at the lake near our house. I was supposed to be watching him, but he wandered off. just walked into the water. Didn't cry, didn't scream, just disappeared. Daniel's chest tightened. I blamed myself, his father said. But my father blamed him, said he was weak, that he embarrassed the family, that he was better off gone. Daniel stood too. So you became him? His father turned. What? You became your father, to avoid becoming Liam. The old man froze. A flicker of something, pain, maybe, passed across his face. I didn't know how to help Caleb, he whispered. So I did what I was taught. I tried to shame the softness out of him. And now? Daniel asked. He looked away. Now I don't know how to undo it. Daniel walked to the door. You start by saying you were wrong, he said. And you say it to Caleb. He came home late that night. I was still awake, sitting on the edge of our bed, waiting. He walked in, quietly, and sat beside me. I think, he said slowly, he wants to try. Try what? Being a grandfather. The next weekend, Daniel's father came to the house. Not with gifts, not with apologies wrapped in sarcasm. Just with a single item, a tiny wooden box. Inside it was a photo of his brother, Liam, a worn toy soldier, and a letter. He handed it to Caleb, kneeling to meet his eyes. His hands trembled as he spoke. I had a brother once, he said. He was kind, quiet. He saw the world in ways no one else did. I wasn't very nice to him. I didn't understand. He swallowed hard. I want to try again. With you. If you'll let me. Caleb looked at the soldier. He didn't speak, just ran his fingers over it. Then, slowly, he placed it next to one of his own toys, right at the front of the line. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. By the time spring arrived, something about the rhythm of our life had changed. It wasn't dramatic, not like a light switch flipping from dark to bright, but more like dawn slowly spreading over a once cold landscape. Daniel's mother visited often now, usually with a new story or small craft project she'd made with Caleb in mind. His sister even brought books she'd read about autism, trying to understand not just Caleb, but herself. And then there was his father. He still struggled. You could see it in the way he hovered at the edges of a room, unsure of what to say or do. But he was there, present. That alone was a kind of miracle. One Saturday, we were invited to a family gathering at a local park. A birthday party for one of Caleb's cousins. Balloons, loud laughter, a bouncing castle. Everything a child might want unless you were a child like Caleb. I was hesitant. Crowds made him uneasy. The noise, the smells, the unpredictability. It could easily overwhelm him. But Daniel looked at me that morning as Caleb carefully packed 3 small toy animals into his backpack. I think we should go, he said gently. Let him try. Let us try. I nodded, but my stomach tightened with worry. The park was already buzzing when we arrived. Children screamed with delight, chasing one another with sticky hands and half-eaten cupcakes. Parents clustered beneath canopies, sipping sodas and catching up. Music blared from a cheap Bluetooth speaker balanced on a cooler. Caleb gripped my hand tighter than usual. You're okay? I whispered, kneeling down to meet his eye. We'll stay close. If it gets too loud, we can go. He nodded without a word, his other hand clutching his backpack to his chest like armor. We made our way toward the table where Daniel's extended family had gathered. His mother waved. His sister smiled. But I noticed his father stiffen when he saw us, hands pausing on a tray of food he was unwrapping. Caleb shrank behind me. He wasn't ready to engage yet. I guided him to the edge of the park, near a small shaded picnic table under a tree, away from the main chaos. He set his animals on the bench and began arranging them in a circle. His breathing steadied. I'll bring him a juice box, Daniel said. You stay with him. I watched Caleb's tiny fingers move the animals into perfect alignment, his brow furrowed in peaceful concentration. It was then that I heard it, a high-pitched laugh, followed by a mocking voice. Hey, what's he doing? Playing baby games. I turned. It was one of the older cousins, Ben, 12, maybe 13, loud, cocky. A group of kids stood behind him, snickering. Caleb's head dropped instantly, his hand stopping mid-motion. The color drained from his face. "Leave him alone," I said, my voice sharp. Ben shrugged. "Just saying. Why doesn't he talk like normal kids? Is he, like, broken or something?" That word. I felt fury rise in my chest. But before I could respond, I heard a voice behind me. Firm, commanding, and entirely unexpected. "Ben." It was Daniel's father. The older man stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his eyes locked on the boy. "That's my grandson you're talking about." Ben looked unsure now. "I was just joking. There's nothing funny about cruelty," the old man said. His voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. It was razor sharp. "Go apologize. Right now." Ben hesitated, then muttered, "Sorry." Without looking at Caleb, the old man didn't move. To him, properly. Ben shifted awkwardly, glanced at Caleb and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be mean." Caleb didn't respond. He didn't need to. His eyes had lifted, just slightly, meeting his grandfather's for a second. And that was enough. Later, after the crowd had died down and the kids were devouring melting cake, Daniel's father approached me under the tree. "I didn't know I had that in me," he said, lowering himself onto the bench beside me. "You did," I replied. "You just didn't know how to use it." He nodded slowly, watching Caleb reposition a plastic lion beside his giraffe. "I still don't understand everything," he admitted. "But I'm learning." I looked at him then, really looked, and I saw not the man who had once laughed dismissively at his grandson, but a grandfather trying to become worthy of the title. Caleb stood suddenly and, without a word, offered him the lion. The old man stared at it, surprised. "For me?" Caleb nodded. He took it with both hands, as though it were fragile glass. "Thank you, buddy." No response. Just a tiny smile from Caleb, quick and fleeting. But it was the first one he'd ever given him. That night, after we got home and Caleb was tucked safely into bed, Daniel sat beside me on the couch, his arm around my shoulder. "I watched my dad today," he said, "and I thought, I wish he had been that man when I was young." "I think he wishes that too," I said softly. Daniel exhaled. "Do you think people really change? Like, all the way?" I thought about the letter, the laughter, the silence that once sat at our dinner table like a ghost. And then I thought of the lion in his father's hand, the apology, the confrontation in the park. "Maybe not all at once," I said, "but piece by piece? Yes, I do." We didn't talk much more after that. There was no need. Sometimes the most powerful moments don't need to be spoken. They just need to be seen. And today we had seen something real. Spring had settled deep into the earth by the time Caleb did something none of us expected. It wasn't grand or dramatic. No speeches. No demands. It was simply a letter. I found it one afternoon on the kitchen table, folded neatly and waiting. It was Caleb's handwriting, small, careful letters, written with the slow patience he always showed when working on his favorite puzzles. Daniel and I sat down together, unfolding the paper with reverence, knowing this wasn't just any letter. It was a message. "Dear Grandpa, I don't always know how to say the things I feel inside. Sometimes words get tangled and I get scared. But I want you to know, I don't think you're mean anymore. I think you're trying. Thank you for the lion. It means a lot. I hope we can be friends. Love, Caleb." Daniel's father sat beside us, tears pooling in his eyes as he read. "I never expected this," he whispered. Daniel put his arm around his father's shoulders. "It's more than we deserved," he said quietly. For the first time, the house felt truly full. In the days that followed, something shifted permanently. That letter wasn't just a bridge between Caleb and his grandfather. It became a symbol, a testament to growth, forgiveness, and the complicated love that binds family. Daniel's father began volunteering at a local center that helped children with autism. Slowly but surely, he started to learn how to listen without judgment. Caleb blossomed in ways none of us could have imagined. His confidence grew, his laughter returned, bright and clear like sunlight through a window long shuttered. And at family dinners, the laughter was no longer cruel or mocking. It was warm. It was real. One evening, months later, Daniel and I watched Caleb playing in the yard with his grandfather. The old man struggled to keep up with Caleb's energy, but he smiled the entire time, eyes bright with something new, pride. Caleb paused and looked up at his grandfather. "Want to hear a secret?" he asked. "Always," the old man replied. Caleb leaned close and whispered, "I'm proud of you too." And in that moment, I realized that the letter had done more than change minds. It had healed hearts. Conclusion. This story is a reminder that change is possible, even in the most unlikely places. That love, when patient and persistent, can break down walls built by fear and misunderstanding. If you've ever felt misunderstood or struggled to be seen for who you truly are, know this: you are not alone. And sometimes, it takes just one brave letter, one honest conversation, or one small act of kindness to start a revolution in a family. Thank you for listening to our story. If it touched you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, every family has a story, and every story deserves